we go along. Also know that your mind will wander as we do this practice. So that's not a problem. We don't expect you to shut off your thinking mind. You can notice that your mind has wandered off whenever that happens and just gently bring it back to our practice if you choose to do that. If you find it challenging to extend kindness to yourself or to others, drawing our attention into the space, you'll notice I'll wait until the sound of that bell drifts off before I begin, and then we'll end our practice also with the sound of the bell. So join me in this blessing meditation. And so you can begin here by settling into a stable and dignified position here in your seat, settling here in God's presence. It's possible for your body to be alert, sitting up straight in a way that feels relaxed and natural for you. You might like your feet to be flat on the floor if you're sitting in a chair, hands in your lap, spine straightened, head up toward the sky. Finding a position that feels comfortable for you and at ease as much as is possible. You might notice this chair or the floor here that God has provided for you to hold you up. Noticing this body that God has created. Noticing that we have this moment right now to connect with God, with God's compassion and grace. And perhaps noticing the points where your body connects with the chair, with the floor, with your clothing, with the air. Feeling the weight of your body, gravity holding you here. And taking a moment to become aware of physical sensations throughout your body. And if you notice any tension there, perhaps giving yourself permission to release that tension. And noticing also if it's helpful to close your eyes for this practice or to have them halfway open, halfway closed, whatever feels the most comfortable for you. Becoming aware of your breathing if you choose, or if you're someone who prefers not to focus on the breath, that's fine to choose a different place to anchor your attention. Could be your feet touching the floor, or maybe even a color that you see, whatever feels grounding for you. But if you choose, focusing your attention on the breath. Noticing the physical sensations of breath moving in and out of your lungs. It's helpful, perhaps taking a couple deep breaths, centering your awareness there on your breathing. And then you can allow your breath to return to its normal rate and rhythm here. No need to control your breath. Just noticing your body breathing itself here in God's presence. Allowing yourself to experience a moment of stillness here. And in this stillness, receiving these words of Jesus from Matthew 11. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Taking a moment to turn towards and receive these compassionate words of Christ. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. And so as you rest in this compassion, bringing to mind an image of yourself in your mind. This could be you as you are now, or maybe you as a small child, doing your best to cultivate a soft and loving heart towards yourself, extending grace and love to yourself. And now imagining yourself in God's light, just letting yourself rest in the warmth of God's light for a moment. And then extending a blessing to yourself by saying each of these phrases silently after me in your mind. May I know God's love. May I know God's joy. May I know God's rest. May I know God's peace. Opening your heart here to experience this blessing, not just in your thoughts, but cultivating a knowing of God's presence in your body and in your breath. May I know God's love. May I know God's joy. May I know God's rest. May I know God's peace. May I know God's love. May I know God's joy. May I know God's rest. May I know God's peace. Bringing to mind now somebody that you love. So this might be a close friend, a family member, a mentor. It could even be someone you don't know that inspires you or uplifts you. Imagining this person in your mind's eye, opening your heart to them, extending love and grace, and imagining this person that you love or admire in God's light, just letting them rest there in the warmth of God's light for a moment. And imagining this person in your mind as you say, may you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. Noticing any feelings of warmth or care that come up in your heart and even in your body as you extend this blessing towards this person that you care about. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. And now bringing to mind a stranger, somebody that you recognize, but maybe you don't know their name. Maybe you have neutral feelings towards this person. Someone you see regularly, or maybe you've only seen them once. As this person comes to mind, imagining them in your mind's eye and recognizing that although you do not know them, they also have a life full of hopes and fears as you have. They too wish for joy as you do. Opening your heart to this person, extending love and grace towards them. And now imagining this stranger in God's light, just letting them rest there in the warmth of God's light for a moment. And imagining this person in your mind as you extend this blessing towards them. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. Repeating this as many times as you would like towards this person that you don't know. I'm bringing to mind now somebody that is difficult for you. This could be somebody that causes some tension or anger or difficult emotions when you interact with them. No need to bring to mind the most difficult person in your life here, but somebody that's caused you some kind of pain or somebody that you don't get along with very well. Imagining this person in your mind's eye, doing your best to hold them gently in your heart with feelings of benevolence and gentleness. And if there are feelings of anger or tension that arise for you, you might try observing these thoughts and feelings with curiosity and kindness toward yourself in this moment. Seeing if you can let go of any attachment to those feelings, setting them free to God's care. Now imagining this difficult person in God's light, allowing them to rest in the warmth of God's light for a moment. And imagining this person in your mind as you say, may you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. And if this is difficult, returning to extending blessing to yourself, recognizing that it is you who's hurting in this moment and in need of compassion, and that God is near to the brokenhearted. May I know God's love. May I know God's joy. May I know God's rest. May I know God's peace. And then when you're ready, extending blessing again to this difficult person who's also in need of compassion. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. And finally, bringing to mind all of creation. Imagining all living beings everywhere, recognizing that all are created by God, loved by God, sustained by his love. You might imagine the whole planet in your mind, blue-green, full of plants and animals and so many people. This whole world in the light of God, all beings resting in the warmth of God's light. Imagining this whole beautiful world as you say, may you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. Extending this blessing to the whole world, may you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. And so resting here in God's blessing, resting here in the stillness that you've cultivated, opening yourself here to God's presence in this place, in this moment. And hearing again these words from Jesus, "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Resting in this blessing. Coming back to the sense of your body breathing, noticing the physical sensations of breath coming into your body and going out of your body, noticing points of contact with surfaces, with the air. If you'd like, as you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. Take in the colors and shapes around you, bringing with you this blessing, allowing this blessing to rest in your heart. As you listen now to the sound of the bell from the beginning of the ring until it can no longer be heard. And so you can bring some movement back into your body if that's helpful for you. Thank you for joining me for this time of stillness, whether you found rest in meditation or in sleep as you went through that practice. I hope that you felt restored and energized by our mindfulness together. We'll be repeating this for the next 2 weeks right here in chapel on Thursdays, and I look forward to seeing you then. So go in peace.